Going to be talking about the fact that
Welcome back to Coalition Pearl. Yes, I caught you. Yeah, I guess we're going to be talking about that, whatever that is.
well, that is that we're kind of in limbo. I
We are.
mean, obviously this is a podcast that talks a lot about third parties and politics and sort of current events, but most of the news is about what Trump's up to as far as his appointments go. But we won't know really anything about those appointments or whether they'll ever get it even be approved or anything like that until he actually is sworn in and he actually makes the actual appointments. So it's like everyone is focused on something that isn't going to happen for 2 months.
Right. But you know what's interesting about that is uh, the Democrats in particular continue to play his game in terms of he is so good at making these announcements and they spend all their time reacting
Yeah.
and instead of saying just let him do his thing and say, hey, don't agree with this, but, and then start giving people a reason to vote for something instead of constantly whining about these things. A, to your point, they haven't even happened yet, and a lot's going to happen in between time.
Yeah.
But more importantly, I think this is the perfect opportunity. Not that they're asking for my advice, but perfect opportunity to start resetting what you stand for and some things that people can get their mind around versus still licking their wounds over the election. I mean, it's over. Move
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that's sort of come up that I find particularly interesting and I think could have an impact on things in the future is how upset some of the big time Democrat donors are that they
Right.
gave all this money into the Democrat Party. And I guess the Harris campaign spent all the $1 billion that
Hmm.
they had plus more. And they're actually looking at being in debt at the moment. And they got absolutely no return for that billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping, because we've talked a lot about campaign finance on this show, and it's a big issue for both of us. I mean, we both, I think,
Yes.
agree that it's an issue. But I mean, one of the ways that would maybe be the best way to deal with campaign finance would be to have people voluntarily just say, "Look, this is just stupid. Let's just not do this anymore. Why are we giving billions of dollars, literally billions of dollars,
Yep.
to these campaigns for them to just spend it on garbage?"
Right.
I guess the Harris campaign they spent a lot of money on like celebrity endorsements and things. That's rich politicians giving rich entertainers money to do nothing. I mean,
Well,
it's terrible.
it kind of proved that celebrity endorsements only go so far. I think even political endorsements only go so far. I mean, maybe there was a time when that kind of made a difference, but I think everybody has so many endorsements now that it's like it's just white noise,
Yeah,
and it comes back to, well, it's great, Taylor Swift endorsed Kamala or whatever, but really what people want to hear about is what can I vote for? What is the reason? And I know they tried to do that, but to some degree on both sides, but it's now kind of back to the old ways now with Trump starting to make these announcements and all that. They keep reacting, and that's why I hope that people are getting so tired of it that they will coalesce around the ones that do want to make a difference, coalesce around a third party and finding a different solution. And the money piece of it, like you said, I think is a big part of that. And it
yeah.
does take money. I don't think anybody argues that it doesn't take money to do these things, but at the same time, for the amount, it's
It's
just
crazy.
it is insane,
Yeah,
totally
it's
insane.
like it's almost like you just have this slush fund that you're determined to use up, and once you've done everything practically that you could do, you just sort of like throw it away on a giant party to have a blowout at the end of the day. And it's like, well, I mean, I guess like if that's what people want to spend their money on, but as I say, I would strongly encourage people not to donate money to the two big
Oh, right.
parties anymore because, I mean, what are you getting for it?
No,
Nothing.
exactly. And you can, determine, regardless whether it's Republicans or Democrats, how that money's being used. Whether it's, I'm sure the Harris campaign said, "Hey, we're going to leave everything out on the field. We're going to try anything and everything to see what sticks against the wall," and that's their justification on
Hmm.
it. um, and then with on the Trump side and the Republican side, the money they're bringing in, did bring in and still are bringing in, from the likes of Elon Musk. I mean,
Oh
those
yeah.
things really concern me. It's like, okay, that's probably about the cheapest, lowest cost investment Elon Musk has made. But
Yeah,
he now
seriously.
has basically an open invitation to talk to Trump anytime he wants, you
Yeah.
know? And that's a lot of power for somebody that's not an elected official. So, I
That
mean, it can manifest itself in lots of weird ways.
Yeah, yeah, and as I say, I think we both agree that we do need someone to look at sort of how campaigns are financed and what they were doing. Like one of the things that Elon Musk did that I think is very interesting for sure, and possibly very bad, was the thing that he did with the lottery, where he was
Yeah.
like, if you do something, you'll get a million. You might have a chance to win $1 million.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of people threw a red flag on that one, and were saying, okay, wait a minute, you can't just pay people to. I can't even remember what he was trying to do, getting people to register or something.
Yeah. They had to
And
register, but they had to be in the swing states.
right, so the thing was about it is that he kind of like found cracks in the system to come up with some strange, bizarre way to make it all work. But I think it shines a light on how bizarre the campaign finance laws can be. I mean, if you can have a lottery for people as part of your campaign, but I mean, I felt for a long time that we sort of live in a bribeocracy. I mean, and I go back to the Harris campaign of the $25,000 per for people to buy a house, or uh,
Right.
trying to refund student loans that the Supreme Court said, I think at least twice, that you can't actually do that, and they just keep doing it anyway.
Right.
And so there's all these ways of sort of saying, hey, we're just going to give you a bunch of free stuff, or we're going to give you money, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. And all of that, I think, needs to be looked at least in some way, so there can be a little bit more seriousness about, you know, what goes on with the way things are funded and financed, and the promises that people are making, and, the lack of honesty or straightforwardness, and, how they would ever accomplish any of those things as well. So it's all very disturbing.
Yeah. No, it is. And the Elon Musk thing about the lottery thing, that one really didn't bother me that much, other than the fact that apparently all the people that did win, they were vetted significantly before they were
Mm.
ever given the money. That, hey, you're going to basically promote that we're good people, and you're not going to come out and rail against Trump and all that. So they're kind of, yeah, it was kind of a lottery, but it was a lottery of people that they wanted to make sure really liked, and I think they had to sign a bunch of agreements and stuff like that too. But the lottery idea I thought was kind of brilliant in a way. It's like,
Yeah.
well, hey, maybe we should have a public lottery, since people seem to be into lotteries. I don't ever get into lotteries, um, but hey, if you vote, we're going to have, and it's just a pool of money, and there's, you pull out 5 millionaires, right, or whatever at the end of it. Maybe it would encourage people to vote more. I don't know, but it was kind of an interesting idea in a weird way,
Yeah.
because
Well, that's what I say. It's definitely fascinating. Might
yeah.
be very bad, but it's definitely fascinating. And the fact that it went on during the election, it's like, okay, so now this is happening.
Well, the part that's always mind-boggling to me is, what's the America's Got Talent, and what's the other talent show, the big one. I don't watch any of them either, but they get, and again, people are voting multiple times and all that, but they get millions and millions and millions of people to
Yeah.
vote on that, take their time to do that. And I realize it's a bit of apples and oranges, but it's like, you got their attention. You do have to kind of figure out, how do you get people's attention, and that's where it comes back, like we've been talking about a lot, is how do you get people re-engaged and become more informed to get involved? Because like some of the Google search stuff that they've been putting up there about on the day of the election and the day after election, the Google searches for So what's in Kamala's tax plan and what's in um, Trump's tax plan? And this is like after the election. It's like,
Yeah.
shouldn't you have been asking that like a couple weeks
Yeah.
ago?
A little bit
It
behind the
wasn't even
curve on
on a
that one.
blip. There was no blip. It's like you're kind of at the wrong time for this, right? So it's like I mean, that's the challenge, but you got to start somewhere. But I don't know.
Well, I also was going to say another thing that I've been sort of thinking about, sort of a little bit lately, is there's a lot of talk about how this is a real red landslide, Republican
Hmm.
wave, that gives this Trump a huge mandate. But I look at it, and what I see is that he did manage to win the swing states, and he took
Yep.
all the swing states. So I mean, in a
Yep.
sense, that is sort of a red wave, sort of a sweep. But what he didn't do was flip any safe state at all, right? So all the states that vote entirely Democrat
Yep.
stayed Democrat, and to me, honestly, when you look at the this election, it's hard to imagine a worse possible candidate for the Democrats. I mean, she came on late in the campaign in a suspicious manner where there was no primary and she was completely untested. She was inheriting a bad set of economic circumstances. She was inheriting two wars, so forth and so on. I mean, she had so many strikes against her, even to begin with at all, that it's, as I say, I think it's almost impossible to imagine a worse candidate. And even in the face of that, Trump didn't shift a single state, not one.
Right.
And so that goes back to kind of me always musing about third parties. I think what has to happen now, and I've always thought this is really kind of what has to happen, is that the impact of the third party is really in places that are so entrenched that there is only one party. One
Right.
party rule hurts everything. It hurts it if it's federally, and it hurts you if it's a state. So California is being a perfect example of that. I mean, Trump lost by a couple million votes or something in
Right.
California.
Yeah.
Garvey lost pretty handily. I mean, I think people were saying that it was maybe closer than they thought, but he still got pretty well
Pretty well
swamped.
slackered. Yeah.
And so, in a place like California, there needs to start to be alternatives, and we need to be able to expand the number of parties that everyone has access to. Because the other thing that occurs to me, the whole talk about, fascists and communists and, who's this terrible person or whatever. If you have a two-party system, you're always just one step away from having a one-party system.
Right.
If you have a five-party system, then even if one of the parties starts to go completely nuts, all the other parties can come together and say, hey, this is nuts, let's not do this. But again, if you just tip the balance of power just enough to give one party or the other enough power so that they can kind of like centralize their control over an area, you get one party governments. That's exactly what you have in California.
Right.
And so somehow, some way, there needs to be a way to break the grip of these one party systems, whether it be Democrat or Republican. And that way, you at least have more opportunity. You have more influence in elections. You have something to say about all the different issues. And, it sort of restores the idea of, federalism, which is, the way the United States is supposed to work. Is the states are supposed to, be engines and making decisions about things. But if they're all just one party
Yeah.
fiefdoms, they're not really much engaged in deciding anything because everybody just figures their vote doesn't matter.
Yeah. No, no, absolutely. Well, and that's why I'm hoping people are exhausted by it. And there's enough people, regardless of party, can get that fire lit. And it's not like there aren't a lot of efforts going on. I mean, you've
Yeah.
got the Forward Party and No Labels Party and a bunch of kind of neophyte parties trying to get started out there. And it's almost like they all need to kind of come together and have their own detente a bit about,
Yeah.
hey, let's coalesce around, to begin. Because again, if you can't get a third party, you're not going to get a fourth or a fifth party, right?
Right.
Right. So let's start with one. And because there is so much animosity and so many people who were Democrat that just couldn't stand they might not have liked Kamala, but there's no way they were ever going to vote for Trump and vice versa, right? And just because they don't have another choice. So it seems like this is the opportunity. And I haven't heard too many rumblings, although I've heard, um, Marianne Williamson, I think her name is, who's been kind of out and about quite a bit lately, talking about, the failures of the Democrat Party and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people are saying that. So,
Yeah.
but she has been sort of a candidate in the past, and it's like, well, I don't know if I don't know much about her really. Um, but how can you get those kinds of people together, along with some Republicans that are obviously very dissatisfied, and put down your arms? Let's figure out how to save what's left of the democracy, right?
Yeah. Well, I was also thinking, about the idea of like, to me, the way that you create a third party is that you go into you create a philosophy that appeals to the middle of the country, and then you draw from both parties to create something new that's centrist and force the other two parties to the extremes. But another way that you could look at it would be that if the two parties decide that they just want to spit out the extremists and just purge themselves of all the problem members, you know, and you get, a new party that's made up of the Kamala Harrises and the Liz Cheneys, then, that can be whatever that is. God only
Right,
knows. And then, the Democrats can go back to being sort of more traditionally what the Democrats were, which is, sort of a center left party. And the
yeah,
Republicans can kind of go back to being what they were, uh, sort of a center right party. And all of these sort of institutionalist, extremist, government entrenchment hacks that nobody really wants can all go off and make themselves into something else. If you had that situation, then you could that would actually, for me, that I would be pretty happy about that.
right,
But again, will the institutionalists, let's call them, pull away enough that they want to form their own institutional party
right,
that, hopefully the rest of the country will then proceed to ignore?
right. Yeah, and I think a lot of them are buying their time. They're thinking, in the case of Republicans, that okay, Trump's got 4 years. He's not going to run again after that. Who knows what's going to happen? He may not even last the 4 years. You never know, right?
Yeah.
And and then on the other side, Democrats are in the same boat. It's like, well, now we have 4 years to regroup, and we don't really want to start from scratch. And so there's just never that incentive. That's where you just hope a few of them start to break off that are so dissatisfied that,
Yeah.
the odds of reforming either one of those two parties, I think, is a longer shot than getting a third party started.
Yeah. Well, anytime, as somebody who's thought about third parties for a long time, anytime you're engaging in a conversation about new parties or third parties, basically everything is a long shot.
Oh,
So it's
absolutely.
sort of one of those things.
Yeah, but even, and I think it comes back to what you said a while back, which I totally agree with, is let's just keep this simple. Step one is just deregister.
Yeah. I think that
Become
really
no
is it.
party preference. If we can, maybe that's just the single message, right? That's like, just don't register and or support either one of these two parties.
Right.
That doesn't put you in any position, that won't allow you to vote or anything like that. But it sends that message, and hopefully people are getting that message. I mean, I tell everybody I say no, who's whining about something. Say, well, deregister. Start there. It's about the easiest thing you can do, and it doesn't cost you anything, and it sends a message.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually sent an email recently to the Reform Party's California branch to see if I could get a response out of them because, again, I go back to the Reform Party from the Ross Perot days, and that was,
Right,
the first thing I ever registered for was for the Reform Party. But I haven't really heard much from them or seen
right,
what they're doing. I mean, I think that their platform is more akin to the things that I'm sort of believing
right.
and interested in than anything else. And it's also a party which I still think is to some extent untested. It still has potential to go somewhere. So I'm sort of interested to see if maybe they'd be more willing to plant their banner a little bit in California and see if that could go somewhere. But I haven't heard back anything from them, so it's. I mean,
Who
it may
knows?
just be a phantom on the internet somewhere that still has a has an email address. But it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see if that ever comes to anything.
Yeah, well, and I hope people stop and think, coming back to trying to figure out what those kind of centrist policies are, um, and kind of focus on them, because I think what this election also did is turned everything kind of so upside down in a way that now abortion is really no longer an issue for Republicans. They
Yeah,
they managed to corner that wallet off, and because those states where their abortion was on the ballot, for the most part, it got passed, and abortion is going to become legal again in those areas. And now the Republicans are like, hey, hey, do whatever you want. And so they've kind of, it's not really a talking point in my mind anymore for Democrats to
yeah,
say, you know, we are the pro-choice. It's like, great, you're pro-choice, but so are more and more states all the time. It's not going to be the sticking point that it once was, and that's, I think, a big change, because that was the one major issue I think they were really banking on, the
yeah,
fight against the Republicans, and it wasn't an issue. I mean, yeah, you have Florida that's still, doing their thing and all that, but for the most part, people are taking that into their own hands, and the abortion thing is kind of getting settled. I mean, people are still talking about, they're going to start this national ban, and now that the Trump regime's in and all that. And it's like, why would they even go down that road? I
yeah,
mean, that used to be the one splinter in their foot,
yeah.
basically. And that's been plucked out. It's like, it's really not an issue anymore. And yes, you're going to have some pro-lifers that aren't happy with that, but they're a pretty small minority.
Yeah,
And
they're a very small minority.
and
But
so
I can
it's
almost,
like, man, I didn't, they got themselves out of that pickle, I think,
yeah.
for the future.
But as I say, that's one of the things that leaves the Democrats in sort of a quandary, because
Yep.
it's the same way with the idea of the Supreme Court nominations. A lot of people are worried that okay, Trump's back in office, he's probably going to nominate one or two more Supreme Court's
Yeah.
nominees. But the thing is, it's like if the abortion issue isn't really going to be part of the Supreme Court session, and it certainly doesn't really look like it is, then what are the left right issues that people are so up in arms about that the Supreme Court is going to decide in its next 4 years or so? I think that issue was so overwhelmingly the most controversial and the most talked about that when it comes now to the Supreme Court, even it's like, well, they might decide, some kind of tax policy or some sort of regulatory issue or
Yeah.
this or that. But I don't see the Supreme Court being anywhere near as controversial as it has been in years past. Now that Roe is gone and that's no longer on the docket.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is kind of resolve. I think it is going to resolve itself. There's always going to be some holdouts or ways people are going to finagle themselves, like
Mm.
Florida's trying to do. Um, but it's a matter of time. I mean, it's Roe was around, what, 50 years. So if it
Yeah,
takes, 10 or 12 years for Florida to figure out a way to get around that. And, I mean, ultimately, I think most people want some flexibility with abortion. So it's kind of reversed it. So I don't know. Personally, I think over the long term, it's a blessing that it
I do
happened the
too.
way it is,
Yeah,
because it's going to be a lot harder, to try and do really radical things as far as total abortion bans and things like that. I think it's going to be much, much harder now.
well,
Um, that's not to say there aren't some sad cases going on, because there are.
I think that it's interesting to think of the state situation with abortion as an analogy to the multiple party system.
Yeah.
The reason that you'll never get the United States having a really radical position on abortion at this point is that not all 50 states are going to support any one particular radical position on abortion. If you really wanted to support having abortion remain legal in the United States forever, the safest thing to do is leave it in the hands of the states, because
Yeah.
there's no way all 50 states are ever going to agree on banning abortion. Where you get yourself into trouble is if you do something dumb and you bring it back into the federal realm, even if your intention is to make it legal everywhere. Once you put it back into the federal realm, now all of a sudden there's the potential to ban it federally, and then it really can be banned. So the smart thing to do was to put it into the states and leave it in the states. And that way it's pretty much going to be legal forever.
Yep. No, it is. I think it's turning out over the long haul. Again, people look at it as this, today's world, and it's like, yeah, there's some, I think, some poor things that are going on in certain states, the way, some of the stories you hear out of Texas and stuff. But over the long term, this is probably going to be the best route
Yeah.
because it'll eventually get resolved and more permanently, and you won't have all this craziness going on. So, what I think is going to be fun, uh, in a weird way, is as Trump gets involved in this, all the list of and you could say this about anybody, just not Trump, but he just happens to be more verbose in some of his proclamations and
Yeah.
promises of doing things that, he is going to inherit a lot of stuff. And in terms of whether it's the debt, whether it's this whole immigration thing where he's like made these pronouncements of these giant deportation things. And like I keep saying, his whole deportation thing is his latest, we're going to build a wall and Mexico is going to pay for it. It sounds so good as a tagline, right?
Yeah, but in
But
practicality.
to actually do that, um, you would have to pull out every law enforcement officer you can find to go round up all these people, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that you shouldn't keep an eye on it, but that's where he does a masterful job to getting people react to these things he says versus them coming up and say, hey, yeah, whatever, that doesn't make any sense. This is what we're going to do, and give
Right.
people some solid plan of what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And they don't do that. They play into his, drafting all the time. It's just mind-boggling.
Well, it's interesting that you brought up immigration again, because I think the one looming thing that could really just be the controversy of controversies and really involve the Supreme Court, since we're sort of wrapping all these things up,
Yep.
is the idea of birthright citizenship. One of the things that Trump has said is that he wants to end birthright citizenship, and that, having looked into it a little bit, apparently has never been addressed by the Supreme Court ever. So that could be. I don't exactly know what would come of that. I mean, it's something that would require a lot of sort of digging into and thinking about. But
Yep.
that could be something that's, I mean, I
Would,
guess
wouldn't
game
that
changing is the only way to put it.
wouldn't that require a constitutional amendment? Because it is
Well,
written into the Constitution. If you're
well,
born here,
that's the thing. It's the idea that the wording, the wording in the Constitution is a little bit vague. It has something to do with being subject to the laws of the United States or something like that.
right?
And so the argument goes that the birthright citizenship laws, for instance, were never intended, like if you were here on vacation from England, that suddenly your kid is an American citizen. Like if I had a child in England, they wouldn't be British. So
Right.
why is it a situation where if the English person comes here and has a kid, they're considered American? And so it's something like it's a little bit nuanced, and I'm not sure it necessarily makes sense. But if the Trump administration makes a push for it, it'll certainly be very controversial.
But isn't the argument against that always? It was like it reminds me of the Obama days when they were tried to claim that he was born in Africa, right? And that even though he was, even if you believe that, which wasn't true, that even though he was raised in Hawaii and all that, that he shouldn't be allowed to run for president because he wasn't born here, right? Or I think Ted Cruz, wasn't he born in Canada? I
Yeah.
think he was born in, so that people were kind of bringing that up. Well, how can he run for president? He's Canadian,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that's the
So
thing.
they
It's
use
the
him when they
idea of a
need to, right?
right. It's the idea of a naturalized citizen versus a born citizen. But the idea that if your parents are American citizens, then it doesn't matter where you're born, you're a citizen. Doesn't matter if
Yeah,
you're
it
born in the
happens in
United
the
States. Doesn't
military
matter if
every
you're born
day.
in Canada.
Yeah,
Right.
happens to
So,
military every day.
but that's what goes back to the whole like birthright citizenship thing. If you have like both parents have entered the country on an illegal basis and they have a child, well, right now the common thinking, the rule of thumb is that child is, um, a citizen.
Right,
But when you read the Constitution, the language is kind of vague on it. So, as I say, since it's never been challenged, and I don't think anyone's ever ruled on it,
right,
I mean, I have no
right.
idea. It'll be interesting to see how it shakes out.
Well, and then there's one layer below that too. If you're born and your parents are documented, but they're not citizens,
Exactly. Who knows?
how does that play out? I can almost understand the argument if they're undocumented and they are living here illegally, that there's a lot who are here, you know, authorized to be here. So
Right.
yeah, but boy, that I don't know. Again, it's one of those things where I think it's going to be really interesting the next 4 years because he's going to fix the economy, all that kind of stuff. Yet at the same time, deport millions and millions of people who probably are doing a lot of the work to keep our economy going. So it's like that's what's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. And where I'm actually kind of encouraged that these are a lot of things he said on the campaign trail, but when you get down into the nuts and bolts of it,
Mhm.
um, things are going to moderate. They have to.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
they've already sort of changed their tune on the mass deportation thing. I mean, they're still saying that they're going to do the mass deportation, but then when they get down to brass tacks, what they're really saying is that look, we're going to go after people who have committed crimes while they're here in the United States, and if we can manage to get through all those people, then maybe we'll move on to something else. So it's like the huge moderation is already happening.
yeah. Again, it goes back to the wall thing for me. It's like these all
Yeah.
sound really good, and boy, it's kind of like the tariff thing. I think that's going to end up getting
Hmm.
moderated in a big way. And again, there's some instances where tariffs make total sense, but the way he's positioned is like, oh yeah, tariffs are going to solve all of our problems. It's like,
Yeah.
no, they're
No.
not going to solve
But
all of our problems.
tariffs are interesting. That someday maybe we should have a deeper discussion into
Yeah,
tariffs. But I think that the key to tariffs is which direction does the trade imbalance fall? Do you have, are you to have a trade surplus or a trade deficit? So,
yeah,
like with China, we obviously buy tons and tons of stuff from China, and they don't buy hardly anything from us.
right.
So, if we put a tariff on Chinese goods, then the Chinese don't really have much of a response because they don't buy anything from us anyway. So if you do tariffs right, you might find a benefit in there somewhere. But if you do them wrong, then you can,
Yeah.
really screw yourself up. So a lot of it depends on just, how it's applied.
No, absolutely. So, anyways, I don't know. I guess I wouldn't say I'm optimistic, but I'm realistic that you know all the kind of scare tactics that have been going on. It's like that we're going to lose so much. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you don't take your eye off of Trump and what he does and says and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, you know, present something that people can get behind. Don't just
Yeah.
cry about it. And
Yeah.
that's not what we're hearing. And hopefully people that do want to find those solutions start really talking about a third party because
Yeah.
that's where it's going to come from.
Yep. No, it's going to be interesting to see what shakes out because, I think there's a lot of people that are sort of waking up to the idea that they've been really lied to for a really long time about a lot of things. Like, one of the things that I just found amusing. I mean, it's kind of irrelevant, but it's just I just had to laugh at it. Was the very cordial sit down between Biden and Trump at the White House.
Yeah.
So essentially, Biden, I guess, has set a new precedent, being the first president of the United States to invite a fascist Nazi who's literally killing women to the White House. I mean, that's breaking some ground right there.
There you go.
And
Right. Lord. So,
on that note, goodbye.
goodbye. Right. I know.